Yo guys, what's going on? I'm Tim Kelly. This is the Real Sports Talk and Nation Sports Blog presents the 30 Clubs, 30 Previews MLB special. Today, we're going to get right into it with the team in the Minnesota Twins. Ron Gardenhire is still their manager. He's been there for quite a long time now. They had an extremely disappointing season last year, going 66 and 96, finishing 22 games out. And honestly, if you look around this division, I would say they're the only team that has not improved or that probably will not improve this year. You look at what the Tigers did last year going to the World Series, they're getting Victor Martinez back. The White Sox, guys like Chris Sale who broke out last year, they should only get better this year. You would think the Royals have so much young talent. They added James Shields, so I don't think there's any question that the Royals are going to be one of the teams in the MLB that improves the most this year. And then the Indians added Michael Bourne. They added Nick Swisher. Terry Francona is coming over as their manager. And then you look at the Twins, who traded away two of their starting three outfielders, and Ben Revere, who got traded to the Phillies, and then they also traded away Denard Span. And while both trades may help the team long-term because they're going to help them build rotation depth, for the immediate future, the Twins are certainly not a team that has any resemblance of depth, especially in the outfield, and it leads you to think that they're headed for a similar fate in 2013 than where they finished in around where they finished in 2012. So let's begin at the DH position with Ryan Doumit, a guy who's a natural catcher. We'll get looks as a backup catcher, and then we'll also actually get some looks in the outfield because, again, of the lack of depth this team has after trading Ben Revere and Denard Span away. So beginning with Ryan Doumit, last year in his first season after spending his entire career with Pittsburgh, prior to that in his first season with the Twins, in 134 games, hit .275, 18 home runs, 75 RBIs. It was solid production out of him, probably one of his best seasons, I would say. And if he hits .275 again, that's what you're going to get out of him. That's the best you're going to get out of him, because prior to that, in his MLB career, he had some seasons where, he had hit .318, but he came back down to earth the two seasons after that, in 2009 and 2010, hitting at about .250 both seasons. So he needs to be a guy that A, stays healthy, and B, as long as he's able to stay healthy, settles into this DH role for the second straight year and produces for this team, because this is not a lineup that is necessarily stacked, and some of their best players you're not sure on health-wise. And that leads you right into Joe Mauer at catcher. Mauer is now 30, or he will be a couple weeks into the season, 30 years old, and last year he was able to stay healthy in 147 games, hit .319 with 10 home runs, 85 RBIs. He's still a very good catcher, so he had a really good bounce-back year last year. Prior to that, he had a couple seasons where he had struggled to stay healthy. But I think that the bottom line with Joe Mauer is they gave him so much money, and it made so much sense at the time. He was a face of not only this team, but he was the face of the MLB. He was on MLB The Show 2 years in a row. He was one of the biggest names in the MLB, and this was a small market team that it appeared they were going to lose him. And when they signed him to that 8-year extension, it was like the greatest thing that ever happened in the MLB, because a small market team was going to keep its superstar. But instead, Mauer's production has declined, and he just has not been the same guy that was hitting the .328, was hitting the .365. That Joe Mauer is not there. And the .319 average is tremendous, don't get me wrong. But when he's had trouble staying healthy, and he's never been a guy that gives you great power production, I don't think that the deal is worth it. I think it's almost held this team back and will continue to hold them back, because it's not a deal that they're anywhere near getting out of. I think there's still 5 seasons left on it. So the Twins are kind of stuck with that deal. It's I believe, $24 million a year deal. And just hindsight's 2020, I guess, but it has not really worked out. Joe Mauer is joined by Justin Morneau, a former MVP over at first base. Morneau last year, after tons of concussion problems, and it even got to the point where many people believed that Morneau may end up having to retire. But he said that this offseason, this is off the Twins website, that he's been able to have a normal offseason for the first time in several years, as past concussion symptoms that have plagued him since his concussion in 2010 against the Blue Jays, those are pretty much gone. So in 134 games last year, he had 267, 19 home runs, 77 RBIs. This is a guy who is, I believe, 32 years old now, 31, 32 years old. He is someone that I do expect his numbers to come back a little bit. He might be a little bit past his prime, but you have to look at the fact that last year he had 267, 19 home runs, 77 RBIs, and he was not all the way back. He was still dealing with some of the concussion-like symptoms. So he is someone that I see hitting at about a 270, 275 clip, about 25 home runs, 85 to 90 RBIs, so it's going to be smaller improvements. He's never going to get back to the guy in 2006 that hit 321 with 34 home runs. That's not going to happen again, but I think that Justin Morneau can get back to being a productive first baseman this year, and you know, for someone who's had concussion problems because of the sport of baseball, getting hit in the head with a pitch, I just hope that Justin Morneau is able to finally stay healthy and play a full season, because prior to all that, he was one of the better first basemen in the game. Over at second base, Jamie Carroll will be your starter. Carroll hit 268 last year, 1 home run, 40 RBIs, 9 stolen bases. He's a veteran. He's been in the MLB since the early 2000s with the Expos, then the Nationals, the Rockies, the Indians, the Dodgers. So he's had a career that's featured him playing on many different teams, and he's always been a productive bench piece. And then the last few years for the Twins, or last season with the Twins, and then a couple seasons for the Dodgers prior to that, he's been pretty productive as an everyday guy. And last year, 268. He's not a great starter. I still think his best role for this team would be on the bench, but he's not someone that is necessarily a liability. He doesn't do one thing great, but he will steal you some bases. He'll field pretty well. He'll give you a respectable average. So basically, he's an average second baseman, I think, is what I would say about him. Now, Brian Dozier will be his backup. He will be the backup of both second and short. Dozier is pretty young, 25 years old. Last year in 84 games, he had 234, 6 home runs, 33 RBIs. He's someone that in the minor leagues hit for a much higher average, including hitting 320 combined between AA and AAA in 2011. So the average, I do expect for him for that average to come up. I do think that the bases stolen this year will also go up. He's someone that stole 25 bases in 2011 at the minor league level. So I think as he gets on base a little bit more, as that average comes up, we'll see the stolen bases come up as well. And I think that he's someone that could potentially take the second base position from Jamie Carroll. If not, we'll see them alternate on days they play, or whatever the case is. We might see a platoon there at second base, but I think that Dozier does have a role for this team, not only as a bench piece, but as someone that will start. And if it doesn't work out over at second base, then he does have the option of shortstop as well, where Pedro Flormont will likely be the starter to begin the season. In 43 games last year, Flormont hit 219, 1 home run, 10 RBIs, stole 3 bases. I think, again, him and Dozier will compete at the shortstop position, and we'll see what ultimately ends up happening. But I would be surprised if by the end of the year, Brian Dozier, barring any health problems, is not a starter. Over at third base, Trevor Plouffe put together a very powerful season last year for the Twins in 119 games, hit 24 home runs, 55 RBIs, so he isn't someone that's going to drive in a ton of runs except for his home runs, and he hit 235, which is something that you really aren't too happy with. Prior to that, in 2011, he hit 231 in about half a season, exactly half a season actually, so he's just never really going to be someone at the MLB level that gives you a high average. I think the Twins realize that, but he is a third baseman that I do look at and believe that he can hit 30 home runs this season and probably drive in 75 to 85 RBIs, somewhere in that area. So you hope that the average is closer to 245, 250 in that area, the respectable area, rather than being in the 230s or even dipping lower than that, which is not something you want to see out of Trevor Plouffe. But he is going to be one of the bigger power bats in this lineup. Another guy who's going to be a power bat in this lineup is Josh Willingham. Willingham has been around the MLB with the Marlins, Nationals, A's, and then last year settled in with the Twins. In 145 games, hit 260 with 35 home runs, which was a career high, and 110 RBIs. For me, he's been one of the most underrated players in the game for a long time, because he's never a guy that is a great player, but he's always been someone that you can count on to get 24, 25 home runs. And then in 2011 in Oakland, where he got his first, I would say, real look at being an everyday guy. He hit 29 home runs, near 100 RBIs, and then got that big contract from the Twins, a 3-year deal. And in the first year, he did not disappoint at all with the 35 home runs, won a Silver Slugger. So I don't anticipate he's going to hit 35 again. I think about 27, 28 is what you should expect out of Josh Willingham. He's going to hit at 260. That's pretty much where he's hit and peaked at throughout his entire career. But he's someone that not a lot of people talk about, but teams have always kind of valued through the trade market and whatnot, because he is someone that has power, and he's not someone that's coming at a ridiculous price considering he hit 35 home runs and drove in over 100 RBIs last year. So he's really the only certainty in this outfield now that Ben Revere and Denard Span are gone. In center field, Darren Massaroni will be your starter. Massaroni last year hit in 77 games, hit 255, or 252 I should say, with 3 home runs. And he is a natural right fielder, but he's going to get the look in center field. And I'm going to talk about the Twins' lack of outfield depth in a moment, but he will be your starting center fielder. And then Chris Parmelee will be your starting right fielder. Last year, Parmelee in 64 games at the MLB level hit 229, but at the AAA level, Parmelee hit 338 with 17 home runs and 49 RBIs. I think he is someone that does have potential in this outfield. Massaroni is really someone that's getting thrown in there because they do not have another option. Now, the Twins, a lot of people criticize them moving Denard Span and Ben Revere because you moved away 2 guys that are very similar, 2 guys that are very young, under team control, did not come at a high price, but they had good value. And what the Twins got back, they got back a very good package in both deals. And basically they said that we know we're not competing now. So while these guys could potentially help our team now and for the next few years, we're going to build up on pitching, which has been the Twins' problem pretty much every year that they haven't had Johan Santana in the last 10 years, because they have never had great depth. Even when they had Johan Santana, they never really had that great guy behind him, with the exception of that 1 year for Francisco Liriano. So they went out and they got Vance Worley. They got Trevor May, who was a big piece. I think that they won that trade with the Phillies. So I think that looking throughout this team, the outfield this year, it's going to be scarce in terms of depth, and I'm going to touch on that in a second. But what they did do with some of these trades was they set themselves up to have probably a better future. Now, a few of the options that we're looking at in the outfield for the 4th man are Aaron Hicks, Oswaldo Arcia, and Joe Benson. And according to Twinkie Town, which is the SB Nation affiliate for the Minnesota Twins, it appears that Joe Benson will likely get the look, that because despite a rough season last year, he was a top prospect, and the Twins do ultimately anticipate that he is going to be a piece that is there for them in the future. So he will likely be their 4th outfielder coming into the year, and who knows what his role will be as this season goes on, if he produces well, or if Massaroni or somebody does not produce well. Then we'll see what happens, or Parmelee for that matter. Josh Willingham's a lock in left field, unless he were to get traded at the deadline, because his name always seems to come up in trade speculation. Now, looking over to this starting rotation, there's some questions about who the ace will be. It's coming down to 2 guys right now, Kevin Correa and Vance Worley. And as I look at both of them, I don't look at either of them as aces. I don't look at either of them as guys that I ever think will have ace-type stuff. But what I do see is 2 solid pitchers, so it's a start for the Twins. We'll begin with Kevin Correa because they have not announced who their opening day starters. Kevin Correa, coming over from the Pirates, is a guy that you would hope he gives you the type of production that he gave the San Diego Padres in 2009, where he had an ERA of 3.91. You hope for that. Unfortunately, though, with the Pirates, he showed more that he was a guy that's probably going to give you an ERA around 4.30. So Kevin Correa is more of a solid number 4 or 5 starter for most teams. Unfortunately, the Twins, with this lack of rotation depth, he will either be their ace or their number 2 guy. Vance Worley, coming over from the Phillies, is not someone who has amazing stuff, but he has a fastball that runs back and hits the inside corner real well, and he has a lot of potential. 2 years ago, with the Phillies in his rookie season, went 11-3 with a 3.01 ERA, finished 3rd in Rookie of the Year voting, and last year was 6-9 with a 4.20 ERA. But what I would say from watching him, because I'm a Phillies fan and I see tons of Vance Worley starts, I don't look at last season like oh, it was a fluke in 2011, and we saw the real Vance Worley last year. He had some health problems. He was not consistent, and he needs to become more consistent, especially now that he's going to be, he doesn't have the luxury of sitting behind Halliday, Lee, and Hamels. But I think that with some of that pressure on him this year, he will actually thrive and have a much better year. I would expect an ERA around 350, 360, but I think he will produce well for this Twins team. And long term, he's actually not even the best piece that they got in that Denard or the Ben Revere trade, because Trevor May is also a top prospect pitching wise. But Vance Worley is a controllable guy in terms of having team control. He's coming at a cheap price. He's only 25 years old still, and he's going to be 25 until the end of the season. So you have him, you have Trevor May, and I think long-term Vance Worley is a very good number 3 starter for this team. Unfortunately, again, they don't have a ton of depth, so he will be asked to be a little bit more than that. Now, Scott Diamond's another guy they have in this rotation. Diamond last year probably had the best year out of anyone in this rotation. Went 12-9 with a 3.54 ERA. Prior to that, in 2011, he had a 5.08 ERA, but that was only in 7 total starts. I'm not sure exactly if Scott Diamond is going to duplicate his season that he had last year. My guess is he's probably going to have that ERA around 380, 375 in that area. So, again, the problem that you're running into with this team is there just really is not even a guy that is close in my mind to being ace-type material. They have a bunch of middle to lower rotation guys, which leaves them without a ton of depth. They're going to get innings out of the pitchers that they have, but they're not going to get any great performances out of the starters that they do have, which it leaves you with a lot of questions and makes you understand how they were this bad of a team last season. Now, behind Scott Diamond, Liam Hendriks will get the nod as the number 4 starter. Hendriks last year came up at the end of the season and in 16 starts was 1-8 with a 5.59 ERA. Was absolutely horrendous and disappointed Twins fans mightily after a tremendous season at AAA Rochester, where he went 9-3 with a 2.20 ERA. I think looking back at that season at AAA, it leads you to believe that last year he struggled, but it's not a sign of things to come. I think he's a top prospect for this team, and he's going to be someone that will have an ERA probably close to 4 this year, but it should come down over the next 4 years, and Liam Hendriks is a piece that long-term will be in this rotation for the Minnesota Twins. Now, Mike Pelfrey is going to be the final guy in this rotation. Pelfrey is someone that had some very solid years with the New York Mets, and his problem was he just could not stay healthy. Last year, only made 3 total appearances, and in 2011, really disappointed having a 4.74 ERA. But if you go back to 2010, a lot of people felt like he got robbed of being an all-star at 10 wins at the all-star break. Ended up 15-9 with a 3.66 ERA. So again, it's another middle-of-the-rotation type guy, but you're getting him for virtually nothing, and he's at the back of this rotation now. So he's actually a very good option, low-risk, high-reward type of guy. They do have DeVries as an option as well in this rotation, but as long as Mike Pelfrey can stay healthy, he should be fine to hold down this final spot in the rotation. Glenn Perkins will round out this team as their closer. Perkins last year did, I should actually pull up those numbers real quick. 16 to 20 saves last year with a 2.56 ERA. He's a converted starter, but last year, in his first year as a closer, did a pretty respectable job. Now that he's coming into the season, knowing that this is his role and he has to thrive in it, I think that's mentally, you're able to prepare yourself coming into the year, and it's just a different thing. It's a different vibe heading into the season, and I think that Glenn Perkins should have a solid year as a closer for this team. Probably blow 4 or 5 saves, but that's about what an average closer is going to do, between 4 and 6 saves every season. Once you get above that, it becomes a little excessive. So the Twins are a team that have potential, but they lack depth both in the outfield, the middle parts of this infield, and the rotation. And then there's a lot of questions about Joe Mauer and Justin Morneau, who both played a respectable amount of games last year, but over the last 2 or 3 years have regressed and have not played. I mean, Joe Mauer had a great season last year, don't get me wrong, but he, over the past 2 or 3 years, has regressed from the guy he was because he hasn't been able to stay healthy, and his numbers have come down a bit. So you look at him and Morneau, all the questions on this team, and I really feel about a 68, 69 win season for the Minnesota Twins in 2013. Leave me your thoughts below. Check out the other previews. I'm Tim Kelly. I'll see you next time.